Hi, welcome to another episode of Vital Times. I am your host, Dr. Ludwig Lin. Today, it is my honor to speak on the record with Dr. Sue Carlisle, a pioneer and leader in California, as well as the nation on academic matters, as well as social justice. Dr. Sue Carlisle is a PhD MD and recently retired as the UCSF Vice Dean for the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital campus for UCSF. Dr. Carlisle was a member of the powerhouse UCSF Anesthesia Critical Care faculty group, and her professional journey was, to quote Sheryl Crow, a long and winding road, but one filled with successive successes. Dr. Carlisle has a PhD from Tulane University, did a postdoc at Rice University in cell biology and parasitology, and was a tenured professor at Temple before getting her MD degree at University of Pennsylvania. She then did an internal medicine residency and critical care medicine fellowship at UCSF. She worked as an internist in private practice before returning to UCSF for an anesthesiology residency. She's been a tireless advocate for anesthesiologists, women's reproductive rights, as well as the importance of a safety net for all San Francisco citizens. I really was happy to be able to get Dr. Carlisle to speak on the record, and I feel like there's just so much to learn. The first thing I want to ask you, Dr. Carlisle, is you've had multiple segments to your career. And of course, they've all been wildly successful, but I wanted to know what went through your thought process, when you changed careers. And did you ever have any, anxiety about not duplicating the previous stage's success, for example? And what made you do each leap?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to speak with you, Ludwig, again. We have a very long history together of professional interactions, so it's a pleasure to do this.
Thank you.
With respect to your question, I think I almost have to go all the way back to my childhood because I started out life intending to be a physician. And then I went to college, and at that time, little girls were very much discouraged from doing professional things such as medical school. And so I was talked out of even applying to medical school and went to graduate school instead. And as you said, I got a PhD, I did research, I did all of those things, I ticked all of those boxes. And then at the end of about 10 years of that, I realized that that was not going to be satisfactory for me for the rest of my life. It was not engaging enough with the things I wanted to do. And I also felt that the money that I was spending on research, I thought that the research could perhaps be important, was really for my benefit rather than for the benefit of the world. So it was at that point that I decided to change careers and go back into school, and I went to medical school. I finished medical school fully intending to be a tropical medicine doctor or an infectious disease doctor or something. Came to UCSF, and as you mentioned, did internal medicine and critical care, and I loved critical care. I truly, truly loved it. But I felt at that time that I needed to give internal medicine a chance because I knew that my experience at UCSF was not the same experience that I would have in private practice. So after a few years, I was also convinced that that was not how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. Therefore, I came back and did a residency in anesthesia with the idea of being on faculty, staying in academics, doing academic medicine, critical care. And also, it was very apparent to me that the combination of operating room anesthesia and critical care was a perfect combination for the kind of attention span that I have. And I really liked I wouldn't call myself an adrenaline junkie, but I really liked the pace of that more than the pace of internal medicine.
Mm.
So you had asked me at one point whether I made decisions intuitively or intentionally. And I think that listening to myself talk about this, they've been much more intentional than I would have thought if I had answered that question before. It really has been a matter of changing careers in order to do something that I felt not only interested me and excited me, but was worth doing. So that's really the path that I have taken up until that point.
Got it. How did you then segue from being a incredible teacher and clinician to taking on more leadership and administrative roles?
Well, that was more of seeing a door open and taking an opportunity that I thought was not only an interesting opportunity, but one that where I could make a difference, and that was changing from being a faculty member in critical care at Parnassus to accepting the job as chief of anesthesia at what was then San Francisco General Hospital. I had worked there for many years part time, and so knew that I really enjoyed the work that was being done there, and that I really thought that the work that was being done there was important, not only in anesthesia, but the whole safety net aspect of the general. It was and remains wonderful. So I took the job as chief of anesthesia, and then it was a bit of an accident that I got into the dean's office. Phil Hopewell, who was holding that position at that point in time, was going away on sabbatical for a year. And so he asked me if I would cover for him for a year, basically as an interim. And I said, sure, and got into the job and found out that there was the opportunity to expand that role into something that would really forward the partnership between the city and the university and really strengthen that partnership to the point that it would be very useful for all of us. And so that became a goal. And when I was offered the job full time, I decided to accept it and give up the chief of anesthesia. That was another intentional decision. However, I think that the intuitive, just taking the open doors kind of thing for both the chiefs and for the interim job um, was done really not without thought, but without ambition, if you understand what I mean
Yes.
about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so once in the role and in the dean's office, it became more and more apparent and a larger and larger role that um, this was a critical role for the university. And that's when the job was elevated to a vice dean's position. And in that position, I feel as though I have managed to strengthen the partnership between the city and the university to the point where there's a great deal of trust. There's much less haggling over the budget. The budget has increased to the point where we're no longer pointing fingers at each other about who's ripping who off about spending too much money because we're very, very transparent about how we spend the city's money and what we need to do in order to take care of patients. So that's made me very, very happy to be able to say that is different.
I don't know how you did that, Dr. Carlisle, because I was a junior faculty member there. In fact, to be transparent, Dr. Carlisle was my very first boss, so I will have to share that with the audience. I remember a time when San Francisco General was such an amazing, training site for the trainees at UCSF, but was always sort of caught in the middle between, you know, budget shortfalls for the city of San Francisco, and different political aims and agendas. So now that you're telling me about all of this and sort of like the overall course of events, it must have been very difficult to really navigate those political wins in addition to maintaining the academic clinical practice and research standards.
Correct. The political winds of the city are always shifting, and maintaining a good working relationship with all aspects of the Department of Public Health has been critical to being sure that we achieve not only our goals, but the goals of the Department of Public Health. And you mentioned the teaching opportunities at the General. The General still remains one of the primary teaching sites for UCSF medical students. And if you query them about why they come to UCSF, a lot of them will say because they want to work at the General. And the same is true in the residencies, that they really value the opportunity to work in the safety net setting and in the trauma setting and in these areas where you don't get that in other parts of the UC system. You get different things, but you don't get that.
Can you list for us some of the achievements that you hold most proudly from your time as the Vice Dean at San Francisco General?
Well, as I just mentioned, getting the budget on stable footing is one of them, and that was greatly benefited by my having a wonderful, wonderful administrative team working with me, and also the new CEO. New, she's been there 5 years now, but 5 years ago, new CEO also getting a team that could work with my team to come up with methodology that was different from what had been done all of those years so that we could have a transparent process. And I'm very, very proud of that. The other thing that I am very proud of in my tenure as Vice Dean is the 20-year saga of getting a UCSF research building built on the campus at ZSFG. And most people don't know that we have an enormously viable research operation going on at the General with about 300 principal investigators and an annual budget between 150 and 200 million dollars a year in research grants.
Nice.
And this has all been done in these 1915, 1930 red brick buildings. And now we're going to have a brand new state of the art research building. And it only took me 20 years to get that accomplished. And so I'm very, very proud of that.
That was a big project. Congratulations for getting it done. I want to circle back about your career course in that I think a lot of people would look at yours, CV and be, of course, supremely envious of all the achievements that you've managed to accrue. However, I think a lot of people would also be really stunned at how you could, stop doing something that you were very successful at and going on to the next. Did you ever have like a moment of fear? Did you ever get cold feet? And how did you make your decisions to take on the new roles and walk through those open doors that you did?
Well, I've often joked that I only had a 10-year attention span. But seriously, to answer your questions, of course, it was very fearful. I think the most anxiety provoking one was probably the change from doing basic research to going back to medical school. It was quitting a job, as you mentioned before, that was a tenured position. Um, it had financial security. It had all of the things that one thinks. It had career security. I was doing quite well. I had NIH grants and all of that stuff, and was running a lab. And so, to just put that on a hook and walk away was anxiety provoking. I
Sure.
actually tried during my first year in medical school to run my lab and be a medical student at the same time. And for the first year, I was able to do it fairly successfully. The second year at Penn, you started in clinical rotations in your second year. And so by that time, I could no longer do it. And that's when I knew that I was on the right path.
Hmm.
But it still felt really weird to give up something that I knew so well and felt so comfortable with. So that was, yes, that was anxiety provoking. On the other hand, to stop and think about what one does in one's life, I have always followed the principle for myself that I have to be doing something that not only gives me joy, but also feels worthwhile doing. And it was a surprise to me that you could be really, really good at something and not feel a lot of joy in doing it. And so that was another thing that I had to reckon with. That realization came when I made the transition from primary care internal medicine back to anesthesia. And I knew that I could be a successful internist, but I also knew that I really, really, quote, had more fun, quote, being a intensivist than I did being a primary care doctor. And so it was worth it to me to make that transition.
Those are really wise words, and I think one that we should all pay a lot of attention to. To sort of flip this question, are there any aspects that you would have changed about your path and your choices?
That's a really, really hard one to think about because, as you pointed out, I've had a lot of successes. I've had a lot of opportunities that um, have been given to me that for which I'm enormously grateful, and I feel as though I've done the best that I could with those opportunities. So, you could always go back and second guess what could have been, might have been, should have been, would have been. Um, if I had been a different person when I was in college, I might have said to the people who were telling me little girls didn't go to medical school, hide and watch. But at that point, I was listening rather than following my gut. And I might do that differently. On the other hand, I also felt when I did finally go to medical school that my being older and having had all of that life experience made me so much more ready to be a physician in the true sense of the word than I would have been had I been a little kid coming out of college.
Yes.
I really felt that was so valuable to have that life experience. I've often joked that I didn't think that they should let anyone under the age of 30 into medical school just for that reason.
Yes.
So while personally there might have been easier to take a different path, I think professionally this was the right one, and it was the right one for me.
Okay, that sounds good. Oh, a difficult question now. So I think about this for myself, and I would like to ask you, uh, like when you're walking or late at night, how do you identify yourself professionally? Do you think of yourself as a internist? Do you think of yourself as a anesthesiologist, as a intensivist? Are you a leader? Are you a researcher? Or is it that you actually just don't process that way?
Well, I hadn't I hadn't processed that way much, um, mostly because I sort of wear the clothes that are appropriate for the role that I'm in for that point in my life, I
Sure.
guess.
Yeah.
However, if if pushed, I think my identity as a physician is enormously important to me. And if you break it down further, I'm first and foremost an intensivist, secondly an anesthesiologist, and third an internist. But they're all important to me. If you think of my roles in leadership, I think my role as the vice dean has been one of the more important ones for me, and that not only as a way of identifying myself, but it also gave me a platform that I felt I could be very influential, not only in the realm in which we were speaking of earlier of the city university partnership, but also promoting the ZSFG and the importance of the work that's done there within the university. And my seat on the Dean's Council gave me a platform in order to be able to do that with not only the chairs of the departments at UCSF, but also with the deans and chancellors that I have worked under. And so I feel that that became a part of how I identified myself. And it felt very important to me at the time.
That that was a stroke of fortune for, I think, everybody involved in San Francisco's healthcare issues and UCSF. So I'm really glad you did that. And it's just interesting for me to think about how people see themselves. And I think that's even more interesting for someone like you who has successfully worn a series of different hats. So thank you for answering that one. I wanted to continue. So you mentioned, using your role as a platform. So let's talk about women in medicine and women in leadership. Have you seen any changes over the time that you've spent in medicine, in academic medicine? And how do you see things going forward?
Oh, absolutely. There has been great progress in the field of medicine in terms of accepting women. I was, I believe our class. I'm not exactly sure the numbers right now, but I believe our class at Penn was 180 students, and there were 35 of us that were women. So you can see that at that point we were a pretty significant minority.
Yeah.
Despite that, the women in our class became great leaders, um, and I think that having the opportunity of to be at a place like Penn, who promoted women, would really made a difference in how women are perceived at the national level. I think that now, the last statistics that I heard for UCSF was that 52% of the incoming class was female, and 52% are underrepresented minorities. And that is just phenomenal considering where we came from. You can see it when you look at the names of the publications. You can see it when you look at um, the chairs of the departments, particularly at UCSF. We've now had two successive chairs of surgery who are women. And that's before Nancy Asher became chair of the surgery department. There were no women of any importance in many important programs in the U.S. And I think that's changing rapidly. And now, even in anesthesia, we've been a little bit slower to take up the call, but now we're getting more and more women into positions of responsibility as well. So I think there's great hope, and I think there's much less of knee jerk of, oh, she can't do it kind of thing than there used to be. So I'm happy with the progress.
What do you see as the next, I don't want to say glass ceiling, but what do you see as the next hurdle or topic that needs to be broached to continue to push for equality?
Well, I think that all of the threats for women's reproductive health rights, just women's health care in general, is a huge problem that we can't have the kind of pipeline that we need coming up in order to have women in positions of responsibility if they do not have control of their health. And it's not just reproductive rights, but other areas of women's health care that really need attention. And so until these things are solved, I think there will always be some sorts of barriers that we're going to have to push up against and push down. So that's a biggie for me. I think the other one is that the changing culture that we have, and I'm seeing some changes already, at least at UCSF, in making sure that the responsibilities of the what quote balanced life work balance is really truly that, and not just that the women go home and do all the work and the men are not expected to take care of the children or the groceries or whatever. I think that's changing. It's not changing fast enough, but it's changing. It was very apparent during the pandemic that it hadn't changed as much as some of us thought maybe it had, because the women who were most affected by not having childcare, not having the ability to leave and go do their work, um, was very, very apparent. And so I think we have a lot of work to do in um, making sure that we have equity throughout all of the things that all of us do to lead our daily lives.
Right. And I almost feel like part of that involves advocating for continued evolution of academic medicine in general, thinking about the
Hmm.
way people's work is evaluated, judged, and thinking about the way people are promoted. Because something that I haven't had to deal with personally, but people talk about how, for example, okay, so now it's okay for women to take a longer maternity leave, but what does that mean in terms of their promotions calendar, and how do you make up for that, and how do you make up for the lost grant opportunities? And this applies to a lot of others as well, in terms of like family care issues or a catastrophic illness that one has to take time out for. So maybe it's a bigger issue that needs to be worked on, and that could potentially, help a lot of people out.
Yes, absolutely. No, the fact that in our country we have such woefully poor support for our families is pitiful. Um, we don't have adequate childcare. We don't have adequate paid leave. We don't have any of the support systems that our educational systems need in order to be really, really, truly successful for not only for women but for all people in all levels of socioeconomic opportunities. We we have to do better in this country. We have to do better with not only those things, but with healthcare opportunities, with the affordability of healthcare. Um, I think we're making some progress, but it's not fast enough. So that's one of the drums that I think needs to be beaten a little more loudly.
Mm. Well, this is a nice way to segue into my next question for you, which is I do want to anchor this conversation in, well, the fact that it's a California Society of Anesthesiologists podcast. And I want to ask you about your thoughts about anesthesiology as a specialty. What do you see as the upcoming risks and threats, and what are the possibilities, and how do you see enthusiastic young people in anesthesiology working on these topics?
Well, I think one of the main things that it is going to be imperative that anesthesiologists do is to make the public more and more and more aware of what it is that anesthesiologists are trained to do and what we can do. And it's not just the general public, but we need to train our colleagues. We need to inform our colleagues better of how important we are to their successes, whether it's in running a pain clinic or running an operating room or running whatever. That it's been really, really clear to me from observing things is that anesthesiologists have the skill sets not only to take excellent care of patients, but also to do all of the kinds of administrative tasks which make operating rooms, pain clinics, all of these things successful. If we did not have people who had those kinds of administrative skills who were willing to help with those things, I think we would be much further behind from where we are now. So that's one place where I think that we can not only promote ourselves, but be very, very useful, which are, as I said before, is something that I feel very strongly that we ought to think about is how useful we are. So that's one aspect of things that I think we need to pay attention to. I know that the CSA and the ASA have very strong lobbying groups around payment methodology, et cetera, et cetera. I think we need to recognize and be part of a solution for equitable pay systems all around, not just for ourselves, but for medicine as a whole. And I think that that's a place where, again, anesthesiologists could be leaders. The third area is the whole area of um, social justice and making sure that health equity is there, that there is health equity, and we can be leaders in all kinds of social justice reforms as well. And then the last one that just, I just have to say it, is that with the recent events in our country around mass shootings, lack of gun control, I think we have to get our voices out there in that arena as well. And I think that we, not only the trauma surgeons who are testifying how horrific these things are, we also have a front row seat, unfortunately, to that. And therefore, the knowledge to have the responsibility to take a stand. So that's the other area that comes to mind right off the top of my head, where I think that we ought to be more active.
Thank you for that. I feel quite inspired by that. I feel like what you're really asking each one of us to do, each listener to this, is that we can each be an advocate in our own environments for our specialty. Let people know
Exactly.
what we're doing. Let our voices be heard. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's a great message. Actually, that's a good way for me to start wrapping up this podcast. It's been so, like I said, inspirational and really educational about the way you went about your career and how it's really satisfying for you. What are the take-home messages that you would like to impart on our listeners? If you could do that.
Don't ever let yourself get stuck in a position just because you're good at it. If you are not enjoying it, look at how to alter it to make it work for you. If that means changing careers, change careers. That's one piece of advice that I feel very, very strongly about. The second speaks to what we were just talking about, and that is don't assume that somebody else is going to take care of something. Um, be active, be proactive, get your voices out there, whether it's just to make sure that your surgeon knows who you are, and how good you are at what you're doing, or whether it's on a national stage to make sure that people hear that we as anesthesia physicians have a voice in how national events go. So I think those are the two things that I would like to leave our listeners with. Um, have fun,
I
be
like
true
it.
to yourself,
I like
and
it.
speak up.
I feel like the messages that I've heard loud and clear from our conversation today is also to be ready. I don't know if you, in particular, made that um, a key talking point during our conversation, but I feel like what I heard was you weren't necessarily um, intentional in the way you went about making your next decisions or your next goals, but you were ready when you wanted to take the next step and a door happened to open up. You were ready and you were ready to take, that next step. You had the tools, the skills, the knowledge to make it work. So that's what I heard from the conversation.
I think that's a good point. It's not one that I've often considered, but I think it's valid. I agree.
And I've known this for years now, but I think this whole idea of um, yeah, not being intentional or having one prescribed route, but rather just sort of, I don't want to sound new agey, but kind of like listening to your heart and doing what you feel like is really going to be satisfying for you. Eventually, that works out. You told me to not worry about going into critical care medicine when it was a very impacted field, to just go ahead and take the plunge and do it. And I did it, and it turned out great. So I appreciate that. Well, so I think that just about wraps up our time for this podcast. Dr. Carlisle, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you being able to relay your experiences to the rest of us. I think, the CSA is all about empowering each member and being advocates. And I feel like you've given all of us a list of things, you know, to do and to work toward that. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lin. It has been my pleasure.